諦めんなよ。諦めんなお前。どうしてそこでやめるんだ、そこで。もう少し頑張ってみろよ。ダメ、諦めたら。周りのこと思えよ。応援してる人たちのこと思ってみろって。あともうちょっとのところなんだから。俺だってこのマイナス10度のところ、しじみが取れるって頑張ってんだよ。絶対やってみろ。必ず目標達成できる。だからこそ、ネバーギブアップ。
Perseverance. Continued effort to do or achieve something despite difficulties, failure, or opposition. This is widely perceived as an admirable quality. However, I see it more as a double-edged sword. We're going to be talking about Cuphead, pretty much all of it, from the development, to the story, to the bosses, and to the player experience. It should go without saying, but I'm spoiling all of it. But because of the nature of Cuphead as a game, I think there's not much to spoil, and I would actually recommend watching this video before playing the game. I will be talking a lot about the many issues I had, and though that'll be what I talk about first, I have many things to praise as well. I only mentioned the bad because I adored this game and want others to experience it, but I think to ignore the flaws would put the wrong expectations in people's mind and lower the chance that they see it through to the end. I also just need to vent, I think. We're going to get pretty comprehensive, so if you're not into gameplay breakdowns and behind the making of the game shenanigans, this video isn't for you. I'm going to be talking the bad, the good, and the stuff to take home. Before we delve into critique land, let me just build the scaffolding for the rest of this video in case you're someone that hasn't played or finished the game, and also give a brief synopsis of my experience with it. Cuphead was released for PC in 2017 and tells the story of a cup man who makes a poor deal with the devil and ends up having to collect souls for him as punishment, before becoming strong enough to overcome said big bad. The story is a cute way of contextualizing what the game is actually about though, beating beautifully hand-drawn and animated bosses that have an emphasis on difficulty alongside an amazing soundtrack. You travel between 3 hub worlds, selecting between a cycle of level styles, which we will spend a lot of time talking about soon. Once inside any level, the game shines, as you're essentially inside of a playable 1930s rubber hose cartoon, with all the bombastic flavour you would expect. You will go from decimating a veggie patch, to being mauled by a dragon, to fucking up a train. At the end of completing any level, you are graded on certain criteria and given an A through D letter grade. These grades are purely for your own completionist's sake and you don't even need to complete every level to beat the game, but again, more on that later. There is also DLC which was released in 2022 where you have the option as playing as the new character Chalice with an updated moveset, where you collect ingredients to save Chalice from the astral plane. In total the game is around 20 hours or so long including the DLC, but time may vary depending on how you approach it. Some people may view this as very low considering the powerhouse 100 plus hour sagas that are games like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3. However, I believe this is a strength of Cuphead. It is reasonable that most normal people can complete it without sacrificing their everyday lives. And because I'd wager a guess that most normal people don't actually finish games anymore and instead play for a few hours or so before moving on to something new, just like how actually finishing a book brings great bittersweet joy, being able to actually finish a game is extremely positive. When the game first came out, I played it for around 15 hours or so, attempting to beat all the levels at the highest rank available, A+. I burnt out hardcore and didn't end up finishing the last 2 bosses, King Dice and the Devil respectively. After 8 years, I'd come back to it to attempt to finish what I started, and after around 13 hours I completed not only the main game at A+ rank, but the DLC as well. One thing I didn't know initially back in 2017, and what I didn't find out until beating the main game on my run back, is that there is a sort of New Game Plus system where after finishing the main game in any capacity, a new difficulty for each boss battle appears called Expert Mode, allowing you to complete each boss again at a new highest rank, S. This was super fucking frustrating to find out. Initially when I started playing, I wanted to front load all the work by completing the game at the highest rank at the start, but whatever. Knowing now that I wanted to make a video about this game, I did another 3 sort of playthroughs. However, to explain my process with each of these, we need to talk about the game's controls a little bit. As Cuphead, you can move left or right, you have a standard jump that can go shorter or higher depending on how long you hold the input, you have a dash that travels a set distance without any invincibility frames, which I will refer to as iframes from here on out, but can be modified to have iframes with an item. You can shoot in 8 directions with an assortment of 9 weapons, but only 2 that can be equipped for any one level. You also have the ability to lock your character in place and aim in 8 directions while standing still. However, this mechanic was always extremely janky for me, and I think unless you're trying to be incredibly optimal / speedrun this game, I'm going to gloss over and ignore this mechanic for the rest of the video. Importantly, you have the ability to parry certain attacks and objects. You do this on Cuphead by pressing the jump input once and only once airborne. When you play the game, you can have up to 2 weapons equipped, 1 of 3 super moves equipped, and 1 piece of equipment that adds specific quirks like more health or making parry timings easier. You start at 3 HP, meaning you have only 2 opportunities to make mistakes during any level. The general play pattern in Cuphead is finding places to deal damage with your weapons, which builds up super cards which can be used individually for stronger attacks, or after building up 5 for a super move. You will find parryable pink attacks or objects that reward you for tight and awkward timings. Your goal is either to reduce the boss's HP from full to 0 or make it to the end of an obstacle course. As for Chalice, a lot stays the same, however you have the ability to double jump now at the cost of your first jump being significantly shorter than Cuphead's. You have 2 different dashes instead of the 1. One of these replaces your jump parry and is now a dash parry without iframes, and the other is a dash with iframes, however can only be performed on the ground and with an extra input required, making it more awkward. However, and I think this is something people don't fully realize, importantly when you play as Chalice, your equipment slot must be taken up by her astral cookie, and no, that's not a sex joke, meaning you don't have the option for situationally strong items. And just for the record, when playing Chalice, you do have an extra 1 starting health and a different set of supers. When playing the game, there are 3 types of levels. The majority of these are platform boss battles, however, there are also obstacle course style levels with the main objective being to reach the end, and finally the jet levels where you 1v1 a boss but inside of a shitty warplane with slightly different controls and mechanics. Unlike how the controls change between Cuphead and Chalice during platformer levels, the difference between Chalice and Cuphead's warplanes are extremely slight. From the testing I did, I found that Cuphead's plane was actually more consistent and easier to use. All of this information that I've laid out influenced the next playthroughs that I did. The first of these 3 was playing through every boss on Expert, with Chalice achieving S rank on all of them, as I really enjoyed her moveset as opposed to Cuphead's. There's this idea in the community though that Chalice makes the game too easy. So on my second New Game Plus, I played through all bosses, achieving S rank with Mr. Mug, except for the plain bosses which I already did on Chalice and I didn't see any purpose in redoing them on an easier character. And finally, after S ranking all the bosses on both Mugman and Chalice, doing all the obstacle course levels on both A+ and P rank, which is the equivalent to S rank as there's no expert mode for the platformer levels, to give myself a break from the hardcore grind of expert mode, I'd just relax and play the game all the way through on regular and not care about any rank I got. I also timed every single level and boss on every playthrough I did, so I'd have some record to refer to looking back. I did this for a few reasons. Notably, one was because I wanted to curate 3 self-imposed difficulty settings for people to play through depending on their goals with the game. These settings from easiest to hardest are the interactive art gallery, a Dark Souls, and time sync. The first is just playing the game at regular difficulty, but ignoring any rank you get, with the focus being just trying to have a fun experience with the creativity of each boss. The second would be achieving an A grade for every single level you play. This is for people that might feel a little hollow if their shit isn't getting rocked and like overcoming obstacles and reveling in their own achievements. I don't think you should grind for A+ on all levels though, importantly. It's a massive waste of time, as you might as well just S rank everything at that point, which is the next difficulty up. The difference between an A rank and an A+ or S rank is usually just time and patience. And finally, the time sync. For this, I recommend blazing through the game on the first difficulty and coming back to the beginning and grinding it all to S. This is for weirdos and idiots like myself that love bashing their head into brick walls. If you choose this path though, I have some pointers that can save you a lot of time that I'll get into later. None of these difficulty options is the right or wrong way to play the game, they're just something I'd recommend depending on what you enjoy in video games. Another big reason I spent as much time as I did going through this game meticulously, playing with different restrictions and rules, was to give the game the attention that I think it deserves. It's clear in almost every part of this game that the utmost care and attention to detail was present. Just like how every member of the team that made this game did things in the stupidest, most time-consuming way possible for the extra 2% quality, I felt it necessary to play through this game from every perspective to give as thorough an analysis as I could. This game is extremely accessible or hostile depending on your expectations and perspective going in, but a lot of really talented people poured their heart and soul into each level, so I'd encourage anyone that hasn't played this to give it a go. It's well worth your time and money. If you're not a super gamer like me, don't worry, you don't need to be, and I'm confident you can finish the game with a little effort. If you've had trouble in the past with any level, I can guarantee it's usually because you're missing something simple that can help you wonders. I'm not going to give a step-by-step guide for every single boss, but I will give some heuristics that help me out heaps. You should put the effort into learning how to parry no matter what difficulty you use. In the beginning, this will make the game harder and a bit precise, but trust me when I say that you will thank yourself for learning early. Every single weapon is viable, however some are better than others, and some specific weapons are extremely strong against certain bosses. The roundabout is easily the strongest and most versatile weapon in the game, as it allows you to focus on just dodging attacks with no regard for your aim. Literally just hold the attack button and face the opposite direction you want to hit. The easiest way to get through a hard boss is to learn the ways you can deal the most damage, as it reduces the amount of time you have to deal with enemy attacks. A spin-off tip from that is recognizing when a boss allows you to stand inside of it without you taking damage. This means that the boss is a background boss and weapons like the spreader can be used for maximum damage. For plain levels, there's not a lot I can say. However, the pointers I do have are always use the heart ring and learning where to look. Usually plain levels have a lot of stuff on screen for you to focus on, so don't waste time staring at yourself, look at the projectiles coming towards you. For platformer levels, usually you can kill most enemies, so if there's a lot of shit on your screen, focus on clearing the enemies first. And my final tip refers to your equipment. There is a massive difference in power levels. I would recommend alternating between the smoke bomb that gives you invincibility on your dash, or the heart ring that allows you to increase your HP if you land enough parries. Obviously disregard if you're using chalice. I mentioned before that I timed every level on each difficulty, and that was so I had an idea of the levels I had the most trouble on. Again, I'm not going to give an in-depth look at every boss, but I'm going to showcase what I'm calling the 4 horsemen of the A+ Apocalypse. These are not solely based on the average times per playthrough, nor are they on intuition. Instead, each boss listed on this highlights a specific issue or issues present through the whole game. There's also a lot of factors that many people don't seem to consider when making their respective tier list. One of these is the fact that as you play, you get better, so obviously your first attempt at a boss will likely be the hardest as you understand the moveset. Obviously, I have my own biases, and I don't think the goal of the critic is to remove your bias, as that's just not possible, but to recognize and minimize them as much as possible. The 4 bosses I selected for this category of hardest are also based around the idea of beating them at the highest possible difficulties, with as much meta-knowledge as is reasonable to assume I would have. To give a quick example of what I mean, I spent a fuckload of time on Captain Brinybeard in shooting and looting, but a majority of that was because I didn't realize you could duck under this stupid laser move. Knowledge like that I'm considering when making this list. The 4 horsemen are as follows: Ribby and Croaks in Clip Joint Calamity, Rumour Honeybottoms in Honeycomb Herald, Calla Maria in High Seas Hijinks, and finally, the worst of all, Perilous Peers. These are in order from worst to worstest, and each has a distinct flavour of awful that I associate with them. For the gay frog couple, I'd like to highlight a problem that a lot of bosses have, but none exemplify more than these 2. That issue being randomness in attack strings. Cuphead's bosses are not set in stone, and you can't perfectly memorize a sequence of inputs to get through them. You need to be both proactive and reactive in the way you dodge and attack. However, this means that sometimes you'll experience 2 entirely different fights. Sometimes the boss will give you a break and hand you softballs for you to perfectly parry with plenty of time in between attacks. However, most of the time, they will freakishly overlap boulders for you to squeeze through. Not to mention that certain attacks are a lot harder to dodge than others. For Ribby and Croaks, I'm referring to their final stage, wherein they can choose between 3 attacks. Unless you're a gamer god, on Expert, you need to withstand 2 out of the 3. These are tigers, frogs, and bulls. Both frogs and bulls are tricky, but reasonable to dodge. However, tigers is some freakish saw trap that will end your run so fucking fast. Another big problem I have with this fight is its placement in the world. This fight is significantly harder than any other fight you've likely done thus far, so its placement can break people's spirits early in their playthrough, but I'll talk more about that later. The second horseman, this dumbass bee, has the same issues as Ribby and Croaks, but adds another layer. The randomness doesn't only come from the attacks now, but also the ground you stand on. The level has a random series of platforms that you ascend through as you fight through her phases. This makes each run frustratingly inconsistent as you try and manage all projectiles while praying for there to be a platform above your head. Couple that with a new issue I'm going to bring up, the parry requirement. See, to achieve A+ or S rank, you need to fulfill certain criteria. For most fights, you need a time under or around 2 minutes, you need to have 3 health remaining, you need to have used 6 cards worth of your super meter, and finally, you need to have parried 3 things. However, not all things count towards this number, which is another big issue I have. But not all fights are created equally. Some have a smorgasbord of options for you to reliably parry, however others, like Miss Honeybottoms, give you nothing but crumbs, covered in poison and spikes. This combination of inconsistency amps up the frustration to 11, and that's if you play as Chalice. If you do this fight as Cuphead, an even bigger problem arises. I'm gonna coin the term floor cucking for this. As I mentioned before, when you play as Cuphead, you can only parry once you're airborne. This puts you in a sort of parry state animation that allows you to not take damage from any parryable projectile for around half a second. Makes sense? All Gucci, right? Okay, now the problem comes when your guy touches the ground. If your character touches the floor in the middle of your parry state, this will cancel your animation, and so that parryable projectile now hits you. This does just come down to get good and nail the timing, but for Honeybottoms, this problem is maxed the fuck out. Not only do the projectiles that are actually parryable come from random angles and heights, but the platforms are at random heights and are so close together sometimes that parries become unreasonably precise. Obviously, I know that there is a sort of pattern to these attacks, however where they come from and their position relative to the platforms makes them essentially random. This problem is alleviated heaps when you play as Chalice, as you can't really get floor cucked on her, but even still, all of this cements Queen Bee at number 2. The third horseman is Calla motherfucking Maria. Though she's the queen of the random attack slot machine, she at least doesn't have the platform problem. No, instead she has something a lot worse, the sin of being a plane level. I mentioned these before, but to make it clear, I absolutely hate these levels. I appreciate that the developers wanted to give us some gameplay variety, but out of the 6 plane levels in the main game and DLC, I only enjoyed 1. Something about how your plane feels sluggish and more like a flying tank, but will suddenly jerk when you use the smallify maneuver, feels super awkward and unfun, compared to the smooth polish of weaving with your character on land. There's not much else to say. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. And I can't believe you can do this, so I'm not counting it as meta knowledge. Also, this fight is insufferable as Chalice, and the clearest example I can think of to demonstrate how much easier the plane levels are with Cuphead. Not only do you get to use the heart ring instead of Chalice's cookie, giving you an extra 2 health, but your attacks are more precise and your super moves more versatile. The final horseman, Calla Maria's fishy little brother, and the worst hell present in this game, by far, is Perilous Piers. This isn't a boss, instead it's just a simple platform level, right? These levels are easily the worst levels in the game by a huge margin. They feel like the developers are actively fucking with you, trying to create the most frustrating experience possible. If that was the goal, they majorly succeeded. None of the 6 run and gun levels were as bad as this one though. This level makes slot machines look like chess in comparison with how random everything is. Sometimes there will be no pink fish for you to parry, and so instead you will need to parry the random stars or shrimp. Good luck with that, try resetting instead. And trust me, if you're trying to A+ or P rank this, you will be resetting a lot. Not to mention the turd barnacles on the ground that have 3 different heights for their projectiles that have no telegraph to distinguish between. For reference, Chef Saltbaker on Expert is who I consider to be the most hard but fair boss in the entire game. That took me 41 minutes and 56 seconds as Chalice, 33 minutes and 56 seconds as Mugman. Getting A+ on Perilous Piers took me 2 hours, 17 minutes and 44 seconds. I reset 157 times. Now to be fair, at the time, I wasn't using the best setup, which I now know to be using the heart ring. Instead, I was playing as Cuphead with the smoke bomb. Not only that, but I didn't realize that you could shoot the flying shrimp in the final section. I think because there is an enemy that can't be killed, I assumed all enemies were like this. Now obviously, these were things that if I took a moment and thought about for like 30 seconds, I would have realized. Maybe, just maybe, I should have taken a break. But that leads me to my biggest problem with this game, and why this is the final horseman. Me, the player. In all seriousness, Perilous Piers isn't all that hard. P ranking it can be a bit tricky, but with enough perseverance, it's totally doable. But I don't think there's a definitive answer to the question of, who's the worst boss in the game? The real answer is the boss that you yourself spent the most time on. No one is perfect. We all get emotional, especially when frustration is present. For some people, they quit and never touch the game. For some, they get depressed. For me though, I will sit, suffering stupidly, bashing my head against the immovable wall until it cracks. I won't take a break, I won't piss, I won't eat, I will sit there resetting until I win. I'm curious if anyone resonates with this, as it's not just a Cuphead specific thing. For me, this was Elden Ring in a nutshell as well. I stood before Tree Sentinel and Margit the Fell Omen at level 1 bashing my head before even realizing that I hadn't leveled up once. This is the point of the whole video. In a way, I'm proud of doing that sort of stuff. It's a sort of strength that can get me through anything. But in a lot of ways, maybe just taking a break is infinitely more efficient and reasonable, and my stupid perseverance got in the way of that. This ties into what I think is my final flaw with the game, and that's level placement. From looking at not just my own experience, talking to a lot of people that played Cuphead but never finished it, and watching everyone's tier lists and perspectives with the game, I've come to the conclusion that difficulty progress in this game is not a smooth curve. It more closely resembles this. The iconic grim matchstick into Rumour Honeybottoms that induced PTSD in everyone's first playthrough, the difficulty flatline into difficulty Mount Everest that is Botanic Panic into Clip Joint Calamity, or my money for the worst decision they made, making the first level most people play Forest Follies, a fucking platform level. I think most people aren't like me and won't force themselves to suffer through something they aren't enjoying. I don't think the first level of this game is representative of the good parts of Cuphead. It's tedious, frustrating, random, and the direction it takes in terms of enemy variety feels very tame and uninspired compared to everything that comes after this. This is such a shame because I think a lot of people will have their perspectives on this game ruined just from one shitty level placement. And the reason this is such a shame is because Cuphead is fucking awesome. I'm done shitting on it and venting. Let's talk about the good. To me, Cuphead is the undisputed king of one thing: presentation. Now, some people may scoff at that, or view it as less than or not as substantive as something like strategy or narrative, but I think that's a shallow thought. I'm sure if you were being honest with yourself, you'd acknowledge how important this aspect of any media is. I'll talk a bit more about the animator's process later, but to mention it here, these guys hand drew 50,000 frames of beautiful and creative rubber hose style frames. It fucking shows. From the footage you're watching or have watched, or if you're someone that played the game, you've got to admit this shit is iconic and honestly so impressive. Every boss is a distinct character with an infinite personality that pops from your monitor. Another reason I made those difficulty settings earlier is to push as many people as I could into seeing all of these incredible pieces of art. The way that each fight tells a story that's perfectly communicated through each phase transition is something I don't think enough people appreciate. In a way, each boss is its own unique episode of their own cartoon. Truly, every fight feels like it has its own vision and persona. Sitting here trying to rack my brain to nitpick, I will just point out that Cagney Carnation in Floral Fury and the Root Pack in Botanic Panic are kinda similar vibes, but that's me trying my best to be an asshole. But to counter myself and talk about the next aspect of the game's presentation, I will mention how one thing makes these two vegetative scuffles extremely different: music. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this as I don't think I have enough background to analyze this properly, but I can't imagine anyone saying something like, Cuphead was great and all, just didn't vibe with the tunes. For me, something I personally struggle a lot with when trying to find fitting music for something is consistency, something I think this game does amazingly. Each song feels perfect for each fight, and though each of these themes are all super different, there feels like there's this string connecting every song together in this beautiful symphony. That's the obvious stuff though, that everyone's praising: art direction and music. But I think there's some stuff that's flown under the radar that I'm going to speak about now. These are, in no particular order of importance: Communication Station, Light Bulb Factory, 1v1 Me Bro, and the DLC. Let's do them in order. By Communication Station, I mean the way the game chooses to communicate things. By this I mean parryable objects, teaching game mechanics, and telegraphing attacks and windows of opportunity. From the very start of the game, it's flexing its communication muscles. The tutorial is not only one of the best, but keeps it incredibly brief before shoving you right into the action. Pretty much everything that's kinda pink can be parried in this game. I'm struggling to think of anything that breaks this rule. And the way pink stands out amongst all the other colors present in every fight make finding parry windows consistently clear. And finally, something extremely vital for this kind of game: telegraphing what enemies' behaviors are. This might be the thing the game does best, as I could intuitively understand what a boss might do in any given scenario my first time looking at it. This makes most fights have very clear windows of reaction and decision. This is just another point in the long list of W's that the art team did when making this game. Next, the Light Bulb Factory. By this I'm talking about how many fantastic ideas are crammed into this game. Most games, even some extremely popular ones, are crammed full of uninspired filler that no one thinks twice about. But this game feels like I've dived into the world of some fucked up kid's imagination. Every enemy ranges from awe-inspiring to cute to hilarious. Creativity in its peak. Similarly to how I felt when I played my first Pokemon game, this game and its designs had me hooked. And I'm not even strictly talking about the visual designs here. Things like what the bosses are actually shooting at you, how they're attacking you and how they set up for each attack. Even outside of that, how you can interact with the levels and the world is incredibly fun. The biggest example I can think of being the nightmare fight in the DLC. 1v1 me bro. This is kind of specific and more relevant to those choosing a more hardcore playthrough. But by this, I'm talking about the rush of adrenaline mixed with high focus flow state that occurs for the truly amazing bosses in this game. When you've died a few times but now understand the patterns and can weave in between the tiny gaps the boss gives you. You're so close, but any hit means that you have to reset, so you're locked the fuck in. Some of the highlight fights that did this for me were aviary action, shooting and looting before I knew you could duck under the laser beam, and one other that I'll get into soon. And finally, I don't hear enough praise for the DLC. For me, it was incredible. First, let's talk about Chalice. Don't get me wrong, I love Cuphead's moveset, but sometimes it feels like you're reaching the limitations of his moveset with certain bosses, making him feel a bit awkward. Chalice is perfect, simple and intuitive to pick up, but much more room for skill expression and mastery. I'd even go so far as to say that for everyone who hasn't played the game before, they should rush to unlock Chalice as fast as possible and play the main game with her instead of Cuphead. Speaking of improvements from the base game, the developers must have agreed that the platformer levels were not the best and instead they were replaced with tutorial-esque style levels named in-game as the King's Leap. These are 5 mini-bosses that push the player into learning and getting comfortable with the new mechanics of Chalice. This, by the way, is another score for Team Communication Station. There is no explicit message from the game telling you how you should play as Chalice. Instead, to beat these mini-bosses, you need to figure out for yourself all the little tricks and micro-mechanics. For example, how you can use parries and precise maneuvering to stay airborne for incredible lengths of time with Chalice's double jump and parry. However, though there are a lot of banger fights in the DLC, for me nothing gets better in the whole game than Chef Saltbaker in A Dish to Die For. I'll fully admit I'm biased in multiple ways for this fight. For one, I love brutally difficult boss battles and bashing my head against them. 2. Final bosses always add an extra layer of drama and tension. And 3. I'm a chef, so of course he holds a special place in my heart. Chef Saltbaker on Expert feels impossible at the start, but there are so many little details and ways you can be proactive to avoid damage that makes S-ranking this feel like a deadly dance duo. I mean, just look at this shit, it's so sick. There was no point at which fighting him made me feel like I was being cheated. It felt like a fair fight through and through, and beating him always brought great catharsis from any of my many attempts fighting him. What a spectacle, and the perfect way to end the game. Let's take a detour before we head to the final chapter. A part of my process when writing these videos is that I look at the majority of content surrounding a game, whether they're tier lists, video essays, speedruns, or playthroughs. Most of the time, at least for video essays and tier lists, people are saying very similar things. So much so actually, that I had a suspicion that people were stealing a lot of content for their scripts off of ChatGPT. Going down this rabbit hole and putting in a bunch of prompts myself, I had a bit of a decision meltdown / crisis. Why shouldn't I just steal essays from ChatGPT? What's the point in writing my own shit? This is a massive can of worms that I need to think more about, but something that I at least came to for this video that links up nicely with everything else is story. It is true that sophisticated AI could write something more eloquent than I ever could, but I think that something it couldn't do is replicate my unique experience and talk about it. And I think that's another hugely incredible thing this game does. By making it as challenging as it is, everyone that's finished this game probably has some story or experience of suffering through something brutally punishing, but persevering through it and living to tell the tale. Dude, I spent like an hour on Grim Matchstick, and when I finally beat him, I was so relieved. It's a sentiment that could be shared by all of us, and there's a sort of group resonance that hopefully can't be replicated by AI. At least not yet. Okay, that's most of what I want to cover in regards to the game itself. But I've neglected to mention the best story surrounding Cuphead, and that is the story of how it came to be. I won't spend too much time on this as I think people have done it better than I ever could, but basically, 2 brothers grew up playing and wanting to make video games, but over time life happened and their initial dream went down in priority. They reconnected and played around with a few concepts as they had no formal background in creating games, so they started from scratch essentially. Eventually they landed on Cuphead, but this came with a few huge problems. I'm going to tie in the 4 horsemen idea from earlier, as these things get in the way of everyone at some point, and I like to recycle. The 4 horsemen, enemies of progress are knowledge canyon, financial mountain, motivation desert, and time ocean. When deciding to make Cuphead the way it is, they not only faced all 4 of these and overcame them, but to be honest opted into suffering through more of them. Firstly, these guys didn't have a background really in any of the skills necessary to make a game like this: animation, programming, and game design. Having a vision and having the ability to make that vision a reality are two very different things. When it comes to any quality product, there are always so many small behind-the-scenes complexities that we all take for granted. This is all the more true when it comes to making video games. I have so much respect for people that throw themselves into difficult situations, learning completely new skill sets to achieve something awesome. These guys started learning, iterated, asked for feedback, iterated some more, and eventually, with the help of a small team, got it done. But this small team, though beneficial, presents another problem. Money. By choosing to have more help, they encounter the next problem. That being the finances to hire the necessary staff and pay for everything. These mad lads, with the help of Microsoft, went all in, remortgaging their houses just to full send this one to the finish line. I think this one is hard to take anything away from. It's easy to say in retrospect that you should always take these aggressive risks, but for every Cuphead story of success, there are 10 more stories of gruesome failure. Financial viability is fickle and up to your own discretion, but good luck out there and try not to gamble your life away. Okay, so they conquered the first two, but now the problem is time and motivation. They have the people, they have the ideas, but what they're choosing, doing almost everything by hand, takes a fuckload of time. Should we not find some modern day shortcuts to expedite this process a little so we're not trapped doing this for years? They said nah, we'll do it the hard way. Except for coloring, but I think they earned at least one shortcut. I think this obstacle is again up to your own discretion. It's hard to know when spending all that extra time is worth it. It's not a simple cost-benefit analysis. I've worked in restaurants where we've spent literal hours peeling tiny kifla potatoes that are just a side component among 8 others, and the customers don't even eat them half the time. But the combination of all the small things that we did created a dish that was greater than the sum of its parts, which I think is extremely analogous to Cuphead. Putting all these things together, the most impressive feat of the developers of Cuphead is that the game actually came out and matched the vision they had. It would have been so easy for this to just be another extremely ambitious project with poor follow-through, but these crazy fucks did it. They actually finished it. I can't imagine how many times they second-guessed themselves or regretted the choices they were making or just didn't feel like doing it, but I'm grateful for the amazing game they created. I'm going to go on a little tangent and tell a story while trying to tie in this theme of perseverance being a double-edged sword. One time as a teenager, I was learning to skate, and part of learning how to skate is learning wacky cool tricks. But out of all the tricks I wanted to learn at the time, I wanted to learn how to do something that I think is called an impossible pickup. Sounds cool, right? Basically, I wanted a cool way to pick up my skateboard from the ground. Basically, it was a super lame trick. But regardless, at the time, I was at a friend's house for a sleepover and we skated together, so obviously we were both trying to learn this trick. We probably started at around 4 PM-ish, I remember because it was still sunny outside, but then after about an hour or two, he got sick of it and went inside to eat dinner. I chose a different path. I convinced myself that I wouldn't go inside unless I could do this trick consistently. For me, this meant that I had to land the trick 10 times in a row. I flipped, I stomped, I flipped, I stomped, 3 in a row, 4 in a row, fail. Back to 6 in a row. Board fell apart, gotta fix it. 8 in a row, failed, shit, try again. My friend comes outside, it's dark out, he says he's gonna go to sleep, but I'm so close at this point. And then some period of time later, I do it. I did 10 in a row. I must have broken my skateboard at least 20 times, and my shoes were ruined and my feet were sore, but at midnight, I came to tell my friend the good news. I was ecstatic. He just wanted to go to bed, and I stopped skating after that. Was my perseverance worth it? It's hard to say. Probably not in this instance, but there are countless times I can remember this quality saving me. Making it through those really hard weeks at work, or the countless romantic rejections. But importantly, without perseverance, this game wouldn't exist, and most importantly, no one would have ever finished it. This game gives birth to countless orgasm-inducing moments from conquering obstacles you couldn't initially. Though keep in mind, perseverance has a self-harming edge to it, and sometimes you gotta take a break. This game's simple and clear aesthetic hides the countless hours spent on every second you see on screen. It has issues, and it is easy to say it's not a masterpiece, but to me that's a lame cop-out and misses the point. Cuphead rules, truly. I know that it's really fucking frustrating to play at times, but hopefully using the difficulty settings I gave earlier and understanding all the little things you can do to help yourself out, you can see it through to the end. I know that scoring something out of 10 is kind of meaningless, but 1, people care a lot about scores, me included, and 2, it quantifies the magnitude of my vibes when experiencing a game. I might have spent a lot of time shitting on the game, but overall how much problems contributed in detracting from my time with the game is dependent on the score that I give. I give Cuphead a strong 7 out of 10, but with DLC it easily moves to an 8 out of 10. I know people may feel strongly about that score, specifically it being low. I'm curious how many people that have those feelings have played and finished the game as many times as I now have. I can understand how someone may score the game a lot higher if they haven't finished it, or only played through on a lower difficulty. And I think that the developers of the game should receive a 9 or 10 out of 10 for achieving their vision. It's just that there are some problems with their vision that I don't think they did enough to remedy. All that being said, play Cuphead. Try and see my critique in its entirety, and I'm sure you'll find the scoring is more than fair. Cuphead takes you on a journey through some incredibly low lows, but if you face them with persistence, overcoming the game and looking over the horizon to see the countless incredibly realized fights brings you to some truly cathartic highs. This game isn't for the faint of heart, but I think most people are a lot more resilient than they think. And if they don't let themselves give up, then this game can be a metaphor for all the obstacles you'll overcome in everyday life. But hey, this is just a game about a cup who made a bad deal. Thank you for watching, peace and love.